What happens when a single heirloom ring can destroy the carefully built fortress of America's most powerful construction dynasty? For Lisa Thompson, a 25-year-old diner waitress struggling to support her grandmother's cancer treatments, that ring was a fire opal piece her great-aunt had left her. For Edward Brennan, the construction magnate whose skyscrapers and bridges dominated city skylines across the nation, it was a specter from his family's blood-soaked past that threatened to expose the foundation of corpses their empire was built upon. She was just serving coffee to business executives at their morning meeting. He was just another wealthy client discussing contracts over breakfast. But when her great-aunt's opal ring caught the morning sunlight streaming through the restaurant window, revealing an engraved family seal that matched the one on his briefcase lock, both their worlds would crumble like a demolished building. This isn't a story about construction contracts. This is about how a single flash of recognition can bring down decades of buried murder, and how sometimes the dead refuse to let their killers rest. The chrome and glass interior of Sullivan's Business Cafe gleamed under the morning sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering views of the construction cranes that perpetually reshaped the downtown skyline. At 7:45 on a Monday morning, the restaurant buzzed with the energy of deal-makers and power brokers, their conversations mixing with the clink of coffee cups and the distant rumble of heavy machinery. Lisa Thompson moved between the tables with weary efficiency, her black uniform and white apron marking her as part of the invisible service class that kept the business world running. Every step sent exhaustion through her body from working 4 different jobs, but her grandmother's chemotherapy treatments weren't going to pay for themselves. The experimental cancer therapy was their last hope, and Lisa's wages from the cafe, the laundromat, the gas station, and weekend house cleaning were all that kept Grandma Rose in the program that might save her life. The antique fire opal ring on her right hand had belonged to her great-aunt Catherine, a woman who had taken Lisa in after her parents abandoned her when she was 12. It was an unusual Victorian piece, a large fire opal surrounded by small diamonds set in white gold with an intricate family crest engraved on the band. Despite the ring's obvious value and her crushing financial pressure, Lisa had never considered selling it. Great-aunt Catherine had made her swear to keep it always, claiming it was proof of something terrible that powerful people had tried to erase from history. At the corner booth, a man in his late 50s sat reviewing architectural blueprints, his presence commanding attention without demanding it. Edward Brennan was silver-haired and imposing, with the kind of quiet authority that came from building half the major structures in the state. His charcoal suit was perfectly tailored, and the leather briefcase beside him bore a gold lock engraved with his family coat of arms. He controlled the largest construction conglomerate on the East Coast, with the power to reshape entire neighborhoods with a single decision. As Lisa approached with Brennan's usual black coffee, her chronic fatigue finally caught up with her. The polished floor was slick from the morning cleaning, and her worn shoes lost traction. She stumbled forward, catching herself against the table, but her ring caught the morning light streaming through the window, casting rainbow reflections across Brennan's blueprints. Edward Brennan glanced up from his plans, and his steel-grey eyes locked onto the fire opal with an expression of absolute shock. The color drained from his face as if he had seen a ghost materialize in broad daylight. "Where did you get that ring?" His voice was barely controlled, each word sharp as a blade. Lisa's heart raced as she steadied herself. "It belonged to my great-aunt, sir. Catherine Walsh. She passed it down to me when she died." Brennan's hand moved instinctively to his briefcase lock, his fingers tracing the engraved family crest with trembling recognition. The design was identical, a castle tower surrounded by Celtic knots, with a banner bearing Latin text. "Catherine Walsh," he repeated, the name seeming to cause him physical pain. "What did she tell you about her past?" "She said she used to work in construction management before I was born. She told me stories about witnessing terrible accidents, about companies that cared more about profits than worker safety." The silence that followed was oppressive. Around them, the business cafe continued its morning routine, but Brennan seemed frozen in place, staring at the opal ring as if it held the power to destroy him. "Catherine Walsh died in 1985, he whispered finally. "She was a safety inspector. She was killed in a construction accident at one of our job sites." The words hit Lisa like hammer blows. "That's impossible." "Aunt Catherine lived until 2017. She raised me after my parents left. She told me about her work exposing safety violations, about discovering something so horrible that powerful people threatened to kill her if she didn't disappear." Brennan's breathing became labored. "What did she tell you about that?" Lisa glanced around nervously, suddenly aware that other diners were beginning to notice their intense conversation. She said she had found evidence that a construction company was cutting safety corners to maximize profits, that workers were dying in preventable accidents because the company refused to spend money on proper equipment. She had to fake her death and disappear because they promised to murder her entire family if she testified. The construction magnate's face went pale. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small leather wallet, from which he produced a laminated newspaper clipping. The headline read, "Safety Inspector Dies in Tragic Construction Accident. Walsh Family Mourns Loss." Below the headline was a photograph of a young woman with determined eyes and a strong jawline. She bore a striking resemblance to Lisa, particularly around the eyes and the stubborn set of her mouth. "Catherine Walsh," Brennan said, his voice breaking. "Daughter of Irish immigrants, brilliant safety inspector, and the woman whose testimony would have destroyed my family's construction empire 38 years ago." Lisa studied the photograph, her mind spinning. The woman in the picture could have been her older sister. "If Catherine Walsh is my great-aunt," Lisa said slowly, "and she was investigating your family's company, then you're not just some waitress who happened to serve me coffee," Brennan replied, his voice hollow with realization. "You're the great-niece of the woman whose murder launched the most profitable phase of my family's business. You're living proof that our greatest crime wasn't buried as completely as we believed." The fire opal ring seemed to pulse with its own inner flame, casting dancing shadows on the white tablecloth. It was more than jewelry. It was evidence, a witness to crimes that had shaped 4 decades of construction projects built on workers' graves. But Catherine Walsh hadn't died in that construction accident. She had escaped hidden, built a new life under a new identity. And now her great-niece stood in the heart of the business district that had been built with her blood money, wearing the proof that could bring down a dynasty constructed on silenced truth. The following afternoon, Lisa found herself in Edward Brennan's private office at the top of Brennan Tower, a gleaming skyscraper that dominated the city's financial district. The office walls were lined with photographs of construction projects spanning decades, each representing millions in revenue generated by increasingly questionable methods. "I need to show you something," Brennan said, his voice heavy with nearly 4 decades of suppressed guilt. He moved to a concealed safe behind a painting of the Brooklyn Bridge, one of his grandfather's first major projects. He withdrew a thick manila envelope and spread its contents across his mahogany conference table. Inside were safety inspection reports, internal memos, and correspondence that made Lisa's blood run cold. "The truth about what happened in 1985, Brennan began, is that Catherine discovered we were systematically ignoring safety violations to meet construction deadlines. Faulty scaffolding, inadequate fall protection, substandard materials. We were cutting every corner possible to maximize profits while workers died preventable deaths." Lisa picked up one of the safety reports, her hands shaking as she read her great-aunt's meticulous documentation of the violations. "She tried to shut down the dangerous sites." "She did more than try," Brennan said bitterly. "She had compiled irrefutable evidence that would have resulted in criminal charges against my father and grandfather. She was scheduled to present her findings to a federal grand jury the week after the accident. Her testimony would have sent our entire leadership to prison and bankrupted the company." He pulled out a series of internal company memos marked "Urgent, Executive Eyes Only, that detailed the family's plan to eliminate Catherine before she could testify. "The construction accident wasn't really an accident," Lisa said, the horrible truth crystallizing in her mind. "My grandfather ordered it," Brennan confirmed, his voice cracking. He had the site foreman rig a scaffolding collapse to make it look like Catherine had been killed by the very safety violations she was trying to expose. It was meant to be poetic justice, silencing her with the danger she was fighting against. Lisa thought of her great-aunt's nightmares, the way she would sometimes wake up screaming about falling metal and collapsing structures, the paranoia that had made them move to different towns throughout Lisa's childhood. "But she survived," Lisa said softly. "Somehow, yes. She must have been suspicious and stayed away from the rigged area, or maybe she was called away at the last minute." When the scaffolding came down, it killed 2 other inspectors who were examining the site. In the chaos and confusion, everyone assumed Catherine was among the victims. The scope of the conspiracy was staggering. How many workers died because of the safety violations? Brennan closed his eyes. "Hundreds over the years, and it didn't stop after 1985. Catherine's supposed death became the cautionary tale that kept other safety inspectors from pushing too hard. We continued cutting corners, ignoring violations, prioritizing profits over human life. And your construction empire was built on a foundation of preventable deaths," Lisa said, the accusation hanging heavy in the air. "Every skyscraper we've built, every bridge we've constructed, every housing development we've completed, it's all been subsidized by the blood of workers whose safety we sacrificed for profit," Brennan admitted. "I've spent 38 years trying to find ways to make amends, but I was too much of a coward to expose what we'd done." Before Lisa could respond, the office door burst open. A man in his 30s entered without knocking, his expensive suit unable to mask the ruthless calculation in his eyes. Behind him came a woman of similar age, her designer clothing and perfect makeup creating an armor of corporate respectability. "Father," the man said, his voice sharp with suspicion, "security said you had brought an unauthorized visitor to the executive floor. How very unusual." "Michael," Brennan said, his tone immediately defensive, "this is Lisa Thompson. Lisa, my son Michael Brennan and my daughter Sarah Brennan Mitchell." Sarah's calculating gaze swept over Lisa's modest clothing with barely concealed contempt. "And what brings Miss Thompson to our corporate headquarters?" "Lisa is Catherine Walsh's great-niece," Brennan said simply. The effect was instantaneous. Both siblings went rigid, and Michael actually stepped backward. The name hung in the air like a curse. "That's impossible," Sarah breathed. "Catherine Walsh died in the scaffolding collapse. It was 38 years ago." "Apparently she survived," Brennan replied. "She changed her identity and built a new life. Lisa is living proof that the family's darkest secret wasn't buried as completely as we thought." Michael found his voice first, his tone sharp with panic. "This is insane. Some random waitress shows up with a piece of jewelry and a wild story, and you're ready to confess to crimes that happened before she was born. She's obviously running a blackmail scheme." "The ring is authentic," Brennan said coldly. "It matches the one Catherine wore in her employee identification photo, and her story explains inconsistencies about that day that have never made sense." Sarah moved closer to the table, studying the documents with the intensity of a corporate lawyer calculating damage control. "Even if this fantastical tale were true," she said slowly, "it changes nothing legally. Catherine Walsh has no standing. She was never part of this family." "But her descendant might have a moral claim to justice," Brennan said quietly. The words exploded like a demolition charge in the quiet office. Sarah's composed mask cracked, revealing the naked ambition underneath. "What exactly are you suggesting, Father?" Michael demanded, his voice rising. "I'm suggesting that maybe it's time this family face the consequences of our crimes. Maybe It's time we made restitution for the lives that were lost due to our negligence." Restitution," Sarah laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to destroy our family's construction empire based on the delusions of some opportunistic stranger? I want to stop living with the knowledge that our wealth is built on the graves of construction workers whose deaths we could have prevented," Brennan shot back. The tension in the room was suffocating. Lisa could see the cold calculation in both siblings' eyes as they assessed how this revelation threatened not just their inheritance, but their own positions in the construction industry. "I think," Sarah said with dangerous calm, "that we need to be very careful about entertaining unsubstantiated claims from outsiders. The Brennan family name represents generations of construction excellence. It would be tragic if our reputation were damaged by someone with questionable motives." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Lisa felt the same chill her great-aunt must have experienced all those years ago when powerful people decided she was too dangerous to live. "Are you threatening her?" Brennan asked, his voice deadly quiet. "I'm protecting this family," Sarah replied smoothly, "as someone should have done 38 years ago." Lisa realized with growing horror that she had walked into the same trap that had nearly killed her great-aunt. The Brennan family's willingness to commit murder to protect their construction empire hadn't ended with the elder generation. It had simply evolved into more sophisticated forms of destruction. The war for the truth had begun, and the stakes were higher than ever. Over the following weeks, the attacks were surgical and devastating. Lisa's position at Sullivan's Cafe was eliminated due to staff restructuring. Her grandmother's cancer treatment was suddenly suspended pending insurance review that tied up Rose's care in bureaucratic limbo. Lisa's other jobs mysteriously dried up as employers cited budget constraints and performance issues. When Lisa found a note in her mailbox offering to purchase her great-aunt's ring for a generous sum with no signature or return address, she knew the full weight of the Brennan construction machine was being brought to bear against her. Edward Brennan, meanwhile, was conducting his own investigation into the scope of his family's safety violations. Using his access to company records, he uncovered evidence that the corner cutting had been even more extensive than he had originally known. "It's not just worker safety," he told Lisa during a secret meeting in a park outside the city. "We've been cutting corners on structural integrity, using substandard materials, bribing building inspectors. The buildings we've constructed over the past 4 decades are potential death traps." "How many people are at risk?" Lisa asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. "Tens of thousands. Office workers, residents, shoppers. Anyone who enters a building we've constructed since 1985 is potentially in danger. And it's not just us. Michael and Sarah have expanded the operation, training other construction companies in our cost-cutting methods." The revelation was staggering in its scope. Lisa was beginning to understand that her great-aunt hadn't just discovered isolated safety violations. She had stumbled onto a systematic corruption of construction standards that had endangered entire communities for decades. The breaking point came when Lisa arrived at the hospital to find her grandmother being transferred to a different facility. The head oncologist explained apologetically that there had been questions raised about the effectiveness of Rose's treatment protocol and the necessity of continued therapy. "I don't understand," Lisa said, her voice shaking with barely controlled fury. "The treatment has been shrinking her tumors. The last scan showed significant improvement. She could actually beat this." "There's been a review of her case," the doctor said uncomfortably. "Questions about whether she truly requires this level of specialized care. I'm sorry, Miss Thompson, the decision has been made." Lisa knew with absolute certainty who was behind this. She also knew that her grandmother, at 83 with advanced cancer, wouldn't survive the disruption of being moved to a lower quality facility. That night, she called Edward Brennan from a payphone outside the hospital. "They're going to kill her," she said without preamble. "Just like they tried to kill Catherine." "Who? What happened?" She told him about the treatment suspension, the fabricated questions about her grandmother's progress, the systematic destruction of everything she had fought to build for Rose. As she spoke, she could hear Brennan's breathing grow harsh with rage. 38 years, he said finally. 38 years, and they're still using the same tactics, still destroying innocent lives to protect their empire of death. "I can't fight them," Lisa said, her voice breaking. "I don't have their resources, their connections." "But you have something they don't," Brennan interrupted. "You have the truth, and you have me. I've been a coward for nearly 4 decades, but I won't be one anymore. Are you ready to finish what your great-aunt started?" Lisa thought of Catherine's final words to her. "The truth always finds a way to surface, honey. Sometimes it just takes the right person to dig it up." "Yes," she said, her voice steady with new-found determination. "Tell me what we need to do." The annual National Construction Industry Summit was held in the gleaming conference center of the Metro Convention Complex, where construction executives, engineers, and government officials from across the country gathered to discuss infrastructure development and building standards. It was the most important construction event of the year, where billion-dollar projects were planned and safety regulations were shaped. Lisa had never imagined she would enter such a place. The convention center's modern architecture represented the pinnacle of construction achievement, and she felt like an intruder in the professional attire Brennan had insisted she wear. "This is where it ends," he had told her during their final planning session. "In front of everyone who has built their careers on our family's lies." Michael and Sarah worked the summit with practiced skill, their corporate personas never faltering even as they kept careful watch on their father. They had grown increasingly concerned about his erratic behavior in recent weeks, his obsession with ancient family history, and most disturbing of all, his growing alliance with the waitress who claimed to be connected to a woman who had died decades ago. The summit's main session proceeded normally through the morning panels and networking lunch. Construction executives and safety regulators congratulated themselves on their collaborative efforts to maintain building standards while carefully avoiding any mention of the systematic violations that had made their wealth possible. But when Edward Brennan took the podium for his scheduled keynote address on construction innovation, something was different in his demeanor. A tension that suggested the afternoon was about to take an unexpected turn. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying clearly through the auditorium's sound system. "Today, I want to talk to you about the true foundation of our industry's success." A murmur ran through the distinguished audience. This wasn't the expected speech about technological advancement and market growth. 38 years ago, Brennan continued, "my family made a decision that has corrupted construction standards ever since. To protect our profits and silence a whistleblower, we orchestrated the murder of a safety inspector who tried to expose the truth about our deadly corner cutting." The murmur grew to shocked gasps. Sarah was pushing through the crowd toward the stage, her face pale with panic. The woman who died trying to protect construction workers was named Catherine Walsh. She was a safety inspector for the Department of Labor, and she had compiled irrefutable evidence that we were systematically ignoring safety regulations to maximize profits. A spotlight found Lisa in the audience. She lifted her chin, meeting Brennan's gaze across the auditorium with steady resolve. But Catherine Walsh didn't die in that scaffolding collapse. She survived, changed her identity, and spent the rest of her life in hiding, too afraid to come forward with the truth that could have saved countless workers' lives. Sarah reached the side of the stage and was frantically gesturing to the event coordinator, trying to get him to cut the microphone. But like everyone else in the auditorium, the coordinator was transfixed by the unfolding confession. "Today," Brennan said, his voice growing stronger. "I'm proud to introduce Catherine Walsh's great-niece, Lisa Thompson, who has helped me uncover the full scope of our family's crimes against construction safety." The auditorium erupted in chaos. Some attendees were applauding, others were arguing loudly, and several construction executives were heading for the exits. But Brennan wasn't finished. "I'm also announcing that I've discovered evidence of ongoing criminal activity within my own family. My children have continued our tradition of safety violations, using modern methods to hide structural defects and bribe inspectors." He looked directly at Michael and Sarah, who had both gone white as concrete. "This evidence has been turned over to federal prosecutors and the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Anyone involved in this decades-long conspiracy against construction safety will be held accountable." Sarah's corporate composure finally shattered completely. "You delusional old fool!" she screamed, her voice carrying even without amplification. "She's nothing but an extortionist, a waitress trying to destroy our family's legacy." "Legacy?" Brennan's voice cut through her hysteria. "What legacy, Sarah? The legacy of dead workers? The legacy of buildings that could collapse and kill thousands?" He gestured to Lisa, who was walking toward the stage with her head held high, despite the hundreds of eyes upon her. Catherine Walsh was 42 when she discovered that the construction company she trusted was built on preventable deaths. Brennan continued, as Lisa joined him at the podium. "She chose worker safety over personal security, truth over comfort. She gave up everything, her name, her career, her life, to try to protect innocent people from our deadly negligence." His voice broke with nearly 4 decades of suppressed emotion. "I can't give Catherine back the career she lost. I can't undo 38 years of hiding and fear. But I can make sure her sacrifice wasn't in vain." He turned to Lisa, taking her hands in his. "I can't replace your great aunt, and I can't erase the struggles your family has faced because of mine. But I can promise you this: the Brennan name will never again be used to endanger workers or hide structural defects." He faced the stunned assembly once more. "Effective immediately, I'm liquidating all Brennan construction holdings and establishing a new foundation dedicated to construction safety and supporting the families of workers killed in preventable accidents." The auditorium had fallen into stunned silence. Even Sarah stood frozen, realizing that her father's public confession had destroyed any chance of containing the scandal or maintaining their construction empire. Lisa felt tears streaming down her cheeks as she looked out at the crowd of construction executives and government officials. These were the people who had shaped building standards for generations, wielding the power to protect or endanger millions of workers and building occupants. But today, for the first time in her life, she felt their equal. "My great-aunt Catherine used to tell me that every worker who dies in a preventable accident leaves behind a family that will never be whole again," she said, her voice steady despite her emotion. "She said that the greatest crime isn't stealing money, it's stealing lives. She said that someday someone would have the courage to speak for those who could no longer speak for themselves." She looked at Michael and Sarah, who stood amid the wreckage of their carefully constructed construction dynasty. Today is that someday. The aftermath of the construction summit sent shockwaves through the building industry nationwide. Michael and Sarah were arrested within hours on charges ranging from bribery to criminally negligent homicide. The investigation that followed uncovered the largest construction safety scandal in American history, with evidence of systematic violations spanning 4 decades. The revelation about Catherine Walsh's attempted murder triggered federal safety inspections that found dangerous structural defects in hundreds of buildings. The Brennan construction empire, built on the foundation of workers' blood, faced complete destruction and billions in liability. But from the ashes of the old regime, something meaningful began to emerge. 2 years after the summit, Lisa stood in the bright lobby of the Catherine Walsh Center for Construction Safety, watching as investigators and advocates prepared for the facility's grand opening. Her grandmother Rose, her cancer in complete remission thanks to the treatment the new foundation had funded, sat nearby in a comfortable chair, her eyes bright with renewed hope for life. "She would have been so proud," Rose said, gesturing to the bustling activity around them. "Catherine always said that every worker deserves to go home safe to their family at the end of the day. The center would provide safety training, inspection services, and support for the families of workers killed in construction accidents. It was the first of many projects funded by the liquidated Brennan fortune, now dedicated to protecting the people the family had spent decades endangering. Edward Brennan, now stripped of his construction licenses and facing his own legal proceedings, approached from across the lobby, moving with the careful steps of a man who had carried guilt for 38 years, but was finally learning to transform it into purpose. "The dedication ceremony is about to begin," he said, offering Lisa his arm. "Ready to honor your great-aunt's memory properly?" Lisa smiled, touching the fire opal ring on her finger, the same piece that had started this extraordinary journey. She had learned that the Latin inscription on the family crest read, "Veritas pro vita," truth for life. "I think she's been waiting for this day for 38 years, Lisa said, as they walked toward the auditorium, where hundreds of construction workers and their families waited. Not wealthy executives this time, but the people whose lives would be protected by Catherine's legacy. Brennan squeezed her arm gently. "She raised a great niece who finished what she started." As Lisa stepped up to address the crowd, she thought about the incredible journey that had brought her here, from a struggling diner waitress to the keeper of a legacy built on her great-aunt's courage, and finally to someone who could transform that legacy into something Catherine would have been proud of. The truth had indeed surfaced, just as her great-aunt had always believed it would. And in its wake had come not just justice, but the rarest gift of all, the chance to turn a story of silenced voices into a chorus of safety that would protect workers for generations to come. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that reflected the struggles of working families everywhere, Lisa began her speech with the words her great-aunt had whispered to her so many years ago: "Every worker deserves to go home safe to their family." Today, we're not just opening a safety center. We're proving that no amount of profit or power can silence the truth forever. In the audience, she could see Brennan wiping away tears, and she knew that somewhere Catherine Walsh was finally at peace. Her battle against construction corruption hadn't ended in defeat after all. It had just taken 38 years to find its way to victory. The story of Lisa Thompson and Edward Brennan reminds us that the courage to challenge construction corruption can echo across generations. Sometimes it takes an outsider with nothing to lose to show us that our greatest weapon against industrial negligence isn't money or connections, but the simple refusal to let truth remain buried under concrete and steel. Catherine Walsh never got to see the construction empire that silenced her, transformed into a force for worker safety and structural integrity. But through her great niece, her unwavering commitment to protecting workers became the foundation of a new kind of legacy, one that proved the most powerful force against construction corruption is simply refusing to let it remain hidden. What would you have done in Lisa's place? Would you have had the courage to challenge a construction dynasty, even knowing it could cost you everything you held dear? If this story moved you, please share it with someone who believes in the power of ordinary people to hold construction companies accountable. Don't forget to follow our channel for more stories that celebrate the triumph of safety over profit and truth over corruption. And remember, sometimes the most important battles are fought not with money or influence, but with the simple determination to honor the dead by protecting the living. Thank you for listening to this tale of courage, sacrifice, and the incredible power of one person's refusal to let construction corruption be forgotten.